If you follow me on X or Instagram, you've probably seen me promote my friend Stephanie Tinsley's podcast.
Andrew Hayes has spent almost 2 decades in prison for a murder committed by someone else. And this is a conviction that is grounded upon the confession of a man with a 62 IQ who was interrogated for about 27 hours without the benefit of counsel. Now, we are not here today asking this court to overturn his conviction and let him out of prison. We are asking for much more limited relief. We are asking for a day in court to present new evidence never heard by anyone, which proves that Andrew is innocent and that someone else is guilty.
Today, she's a special guest on my channel to talk about it. We recorded it after episode 3 had just aired, but episode 5 has now dropped. It makes a big reveal that you'll hear about here, so I waited until that reveal hit the public. My Murdaugh crew will know exactly who Stephanie is, as she's married to a well-known attorney in the case, probably the best known besides the prosecutors. The man brave enough to have taken on the great-grandson to Randolph Murdaugh Sr., the first solicitor who began the law firm and family's legal dynasty. Randolph Murdaugh Jr., the original buster, his bombastic son, took over both the firm and his position as solicitor. He created a reign often referred to as Murdaugh Dynasty. His reign covered large swaths of the Low Country. He made alliances and strengthened the family's position at the top of the legal food chain by means that could hardly be considered legal. Buster's son, Randolph Murdaugh III, continued to strengthen the bonds and build the wealth as the last of the family solicitors. He was still alive and still held power through the mafia-style relationships that had been fostered through the generations, when his grandson, said by some to be a favorite, if not the favorite, Paul Murdaugh, Alex Murdaugh's son, crashed a boat while exceedingly intoxicated. That fateful crash tossed a young Mallory Beach into the water, where it would take 8 days to finally find her. You may have seen my reports on this boat case and the accompanying conspiracy case that followed. But when you have such a powerful legal dynasty, especially in such a small town, it takes a very bold attorney to step up and take on that dynasty. As you can imagine, it might feel like career suicide. It might even feel more personally threatening for reasons it doesn't take much imagination to think about. It had been the rumor for decades that Buster was known to, shall we say, remove anyone that got in his way. That's the legend anyway. But when you've had generations of this kind of power, it's felt. Mark does not have generations of powerful attorneys in the area. He's a South Carolina son, but not originally from the Low Country. He began his legal studies in gentler environmental law and forestry. He is now a formidable litigator, nicknamed the Tiger during the trial when my favorite judge, Judge Newman, referenced him as a tiger on Alex Murdaugh's tail. This remark was made for the tenacity in which Mark took on the role as the Beach family attorney. In that case, he wasn't only taking on Alex and the Murdaugh clan and all of the relationships forged with the Murdaugh clan, he was also taking on local billionaire Greg Parker. From that case, the conspiracy case you've seen me report on was born, where it's alleged that this billionaire Greg Parker hired multiple PIs and a journalist to create a campaign to discourage the Beach family from pursuing the lawsuit by fueling negative reports online, in news articles, on TV shows like Dateline, and ultimately a documentary. Mark had the formidable job of questioning Alex about his finances in initial attempts to work out the boat case on friendlier terms. After Alex's replies were far from straightforward, it was Mark that realized something was very wrong about Alex's reports of his finances. When the defendant is being squirrely, the only thing a good attorney can do in the situation is begin a forensic examination of the defendant's finances. Little did he or anyone else know, Alex had a very good reason to be squirrely. He'd been stealing millions of dollars for over a decade from multiple clients. He'd created 2 separate bank accounts, pretending to be a settlement company where he would stash and cash these checks. 3 days before a hearing on the boat case, Alex murdered his wife and youngest son, Paul, the driver of the boat, for reasons that the state described as a desperate move of a desperate man with an impending perfect storm. Mark would eventually take on some of Alex's financial victims, a fight he's still fighting for them. You might say he had his own impending perfect storm. Parker's attorneys were doing everything in their power to have him removed from the boat and conspiracy cases, questioning his honor as an attorney. If carrying these heavy burdens wasn't enough, he also found that he was facing stage 4 cancer. I think it's hard to imagine how dark those days were for him. But alas, there was a light. He met his beautiful future wife during these times, and there she was, by his side through it all. You'll hear her describe that time in a bonus episode of her podcast called Origin Story, From the Murdaugh Murders to the Mic, a conversation with Stephanie and Mark Tinsley. But with her new podcast, she's proven herself to be just as tenacious as her husband. I've known for months about her project, when she asked for a little assistance with a small part of the massive research that she's done to bring the story to life. But I had no idea just how much she had undertaken. Not content to sit behind a mic and tell a story, she actually went out as a tigress herself and hunted it down. The places she went and the people she talks about are not places and people she visited on the internet. They're places she's actually gone. In Memphis, one of the highest crime cities in the country. She's spoken with Andrew, currently in prison. She's spoken to his original attorney. She's tracked down and spoken to jurors from his trial. I am simply in awe of her bravery and tenacity. She's telling the story of Andrew Wayne Hayes, a man many believe is falsely imprisoned for the murder of Danny Harris, a story that was investigated by some familiar names if you watch the TV show The First 48. After many years in prison, his case is being appealed, and she's telling it in real time as there is an active appeal at this moment. The clip you saw at the beginning was from a hearing on August 5th. She and the attorneys fighting for Andrew are awaiting the court's decision as we speak. But that's enough from me. My dear listeners, I give you Stephanie Tinsley.
So the third episode dropped today. So we've got episode 1 and 2 were released, and then the bonus episode that's the origin story that has Mark in it. It's the origin story is about how the Murdaugh trial affected and inspired me to do this. And so Mark is in that. And then episode 3 dropped yesterday. So it's wild. The first week, the show hit number 15 on Apple's true crime charts. So that was unexpected. It's been very emotional, and it's like having a baby.
It is.
Nobody knew I was pregnant, and then here's my baby.
Well, it's a beautiful baby.
Well, it's a baby. It's something. It's something. The MPD may not think it's a beautiful baby.
Yeah.
But
does that scare you a little bit?
No, because I'm not saying anything that they haven't heard before.
Yeah.
None of this is new to them.
Right.
None of this criticism is new to them. I mean, just in December 2024, the Department of Justice had done a year-long investigation into them. I think you were familiar with the Tyrese Nichols case. So, they came down with that they were violating the rights of the citizens of Memphis. So they have a long history of being criticized for not recording interrogations. They have a long history of being criticized. Granted, Memphis is one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. MPD is overworked, but there's some glaring, opportunities that they've had over the years to fix things. And so, no, I'm not nervous that anything's gonna that I'm going to say anything that hasn't been said before. I think now the show, because it's on an international platform, I mean, I looked at the numbers yesterday, there's as many people in Australia that have heard this story.
Wow.
Yeah, the numbers in Australia are huge. So perhaps the fact that this is now an international story, it may gain a little bit more pressure on the Memphis Police Department to make some policy changes. But yeah.
So as far as you know, are the same people that showed up in that federal report or that were key players in the story you're reporting, are a lot of those people still around, or are some of those gone now, as far as you know?
Yeah, so first, I do want to thank you for all the hard work that you did. And I do want to say, I want to set the stage with how all of your amazing research came to me. I was going to a girls' weekend, and as I was walking out the door, this big box came, and I picked up the box and I took it to the girls' weekend. And I opened it up, and 2 huge binders of research. I mean, you took a deep dive, is not even the word. But I have never in my life, it was 2 huge 3-ring binders with all of the tabs, and everything was color coded and everything was so organized. I mean, it was me and my girlfriends are lawyers, and we were sitting here, it was amazing. It hijacked the whole girls' weekend. We just sat there with the binders and just read and read and read and read.
Wasn't it shocking?
Shocking. It was shocking. It's shocking to see it all in one place. And, I'd seen one of your questions before I started the story. Did I know that there was, trouble with the Memphis PD? I live in Nashville, and Memphis is 3 hours away. And so we get their news coverage. When things happen, I'm not aware of, every 5 p.m. Evening news in Memphis, but we hear a lot of the big things. A lot of, like, Tyree Nichols was a big thing. So I had known that the MPD had issues for years. And to answer your questions, the names that you hear in Andrew's case and in my podcast, Everything They Missed, the cops that are detectives that you hear in this story, yes, I mean, they're Tony Armstrong has since retired, and he's working head of security, I believe, at St. Jude, which is a huge hospital system in Memphis. But Carolyn Mason, I believe, is still on staff. Tony Mullins, I believe, is still on staff. So yes, and there's some of the detectives have even been in the headlines recently. So
wow,
yeah,
that's shocking.
It is and it isn't. It is and it isn't. I think if you've been allowed, so much leeway to do and act in a certain way, then sometimes it just continues on for decades. But the big issue with this story in this case was recording interrogations, and I think why this story took such a interest in, like, what happened, what went wrong with the Andrew Hayes interrogation, was that it wasn't recorded. Now I believe, and I've seen, although the MPD has never responded to any emails that I have sent to ask direct questions about their policy situations, I've never gotten a response back. But from other reporters that I've talked to, other local reporters in Memphis, I believe now they are recording all homicide interrogations. But I've never been able to verify.
Confirm.
That. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So just homicide, which is kind of crazy.
That's what I have been told. Right. That's what I have been told. I would love... They have my email address. I would love to have an official statement so I can officially say, because I would love to say that,
that they've improved.
Yes, I would love to say that. I would be happy to say that. But I have never, it's never been confirmed for me.
So MPD, if you're listening, please respond.
Please respond. Stephanie at Stufftown Studios is my email. Let me know. You can also leave me a message on my website. I've got a tip line. Just type it in. We are recording our interrogations.
Yeah, it was shocking. When I first started looking into it, I didn't quite know where to start. And then I came across that federal investigation, and it had just happened. I think it was December of last year.
That's right.
And it was so detailed. And there was a video, an accompanying video. When that came out, they did a press release about it. And they had different federal agents who had worked on the report. And they talked about what some of the problems were. And so it just kind of laid itself out. And a lot of the problems that were in the report were things that you had asked me about. And there they were. Mentally challenged people being a target.
Black people.
Things, yeah. And then when I found that, what were they called? Scorpions?
Right. So they dismantled
special
the scorpions, but yes.
Yeah, that needed to be done. That to me was the most terrifying. And then from there, it was just like, once you had the names, and there were a couple of reporters and that kind of like stuck to the story and had kept telling it in one of the local newspapers. And they were a wealth of information to come across, but I never expected there to be that much information. And the brutality, you hear about police brutality, but I think we kind of keep an optimistic point of view, or kind of think we can't imagine people being totally amoral or immoral or just having no moral compass.
Right.
It's hard to imagine that deep down people don't have something good in there somewhere. So when you find something like this, it just, I don't know, it does something to your brain for a minute to just imagine how people who wear blue and wear a badge and are supposed to be helping people, how does it get this far off from that and turn into what it's turned into there? I just have to say, I think you're so brave to take this story on.
Well, thank you. And, I didn't know the story I was taking on when it started. I didn't know I was going to halt production for 2 months and take a deep dive into police interrogation techniques. When the story was presented to me, it was presented as the savage murder that happened in Memphis in 2007, but a brutal murder of Danny Harris. He was 55 years old. He was a resident of Tennessee his whole life. Tennessee Air National Guard is where he worked for a very long time. He has 4 sons, and the murder happened on August 20th in 2007, and they didn't discover his body for 2 months. He had been estranged from his family, and he was suffering from some alcohol addiction issues. And because of that, his family had given him some tough love, and I understand that. And when he had passed away, because he was estranged from his family, his body had gone, unnoticed for 2 months, and they only discovered him when the apartment manager went to do a welfare check. When they let himself in, that's when they discovered his body. Even though it had been 2 months, they knew the exact date and time of his death because his pacemaker.
Yeah, I heard that in the podcast.
It's such a sad visual of, you can see by his pacemaker records that it spikes, when the actual murder is happening, and the pacemaker is actually delivering shocks to him, trying to keep him alive as someone is murdering him, which just the visual of that is very
difficult. But it's like a recording of his death. Well, not like it actually is.
Yeah. So, it was a hurried investigation from when I started digging into it. And that's when I really wanted to know why, and I really had a lot of questions. The investigation was wrapped up in about 2 days, and the man who confessed was a man named Andrew Hayes, a 24-year-old black man from Memphis. And after a 27-hour interrogation, unrecorded interrogation like we were talking about before, Andrew has a 62 IQ, and so a 62 IQ is equivalent to that of a third grader. I've talked to him several times. He did not understand what waiving his rights meant. He didn't understand that when you waive.
Oh, you've actually talked to him.
I have. I've talked to him several times. I've gone really deep into this. And, he just told me that he didn't understand, and he had spent his life afraid of cops and trusting cops. I think when you're anybody that I've talked to in Memphis says they have that relationship with the police, that they're afraid of them and they respect them. And so when he waived his rights, he didn't realize that the police could lie to him. So Andrew didn't realize that the police could lie to him, and he was, went down to the station to be helpful, and the only reason that he had gone to the station is he was giving two witnesses a ride to the station. And so he was just there and being helpful. And, the podcast really goes into the whys of why he got pulled back into the interrogation room. But once he got pulled back into the interrogation room and waived his Miranda rights, he didn't have a chance. He with 62 IQ, third grader IQ, he was no match to the skilled detectives. And in my opinion, I believe that they really had tunnel vision, and he, perhaps went down for a murder that he didn't commit. Since then, what has brought this story back to life is new evidence has come out that is pointing away from Andrew and toward another person. And when I started this story, this podcast, this investigation, I was looking to tell a story that had purpose, that had a lot of things that I could learn along the way and share. And I was reluctant to do a story about a wrongful conviction because I think sometimes when you turn on podcasts and it's a wrongful conviction, it starts out biased. Even when you see the title wrongful conviction, you automatically think, okay, this person has a certain point of view and they're going to tell me that point of view. And so I was a little reluctant at first, but what was intriguing to me is if the wrong person has gone down for the murder, what does that mean? That means the person responsible for the murder is still out there. Yeah. So has justice been served? And that, I have been a true crime fan since before that's a phrase. I have been a true crime fan since the 80s when I would go visit my aunt and she would read true crime books all summer long. And so I've watched every Dateline, every 48 hours, every Snapped, every show out there. And I have always been intrigued by the mystery and the whodunit and the what ifs. And so when I started...
And just wanting to see justice done.
Just wanting to see justice done. So that is what really captivated me about this story why I really dug into it is the question of, is the right person in jail? If this isn't the right person and this new evidence is pointing towards somebody else, let's look at that. And, is justice served for Danny Harris's family? And, you can't be the wife of Mark Tinsley and not have some guts to go after justice. So I definitely think it runs in the family. So, when I have talked about this case nonstop, Mark has been an unexpected contributor to the podcast. You will hear him in the bonus episode. You'll hear him in episode 4. You'll hear him throughout because the story.
I love that you guys get to do this together. That's so exciting.
Me too. Yeah. And, I only used him as a sounding board at the very beginning. And then I would start just hitting record on my phone when he would start talking because I would think, I've got to remember this for my notes. And I would go back and listen to him. And it was such a rich conversation that out of those, just me and him sitting at the kitchen table with me just like hitting record on my phone, and it makes it into the show. So,
okay, you mentioned that he had the low IQ in the 60s and how he was no match for the MPD. What are some of the problems and earlier you talked about the recording of the interrogation techniques, but what were some of the techniques that they used against Andrew that made it where he was no match and had no hope from that point?
Well, you ask a question that raises the issue. We don't know because it wasn't recorded. So we only have what Andrew has told me. You know, this is the issue. And I am hard on the Memphis Police Department because they are part of the story. But I have to bring up a bigger issue there's 20 states in the United States that do not require, law enforcement to record interrogations.
Oh, wow.
And the thing that scares me the most, and because I am a Southerner, I've lived in the South my entire life. When you look at a picture of the United States, the 20 states that do not record interrogations, it's the South. It's the South. Why is that? So that's just a question that I would dig into later. But that the question of how it happened to Andrew, what kind of techniques did they use, and the short answer is we don't know because they didn't record it. If you ask Andrew, what he would tell you is it went straight from, what's your name, to we know you were there, you did this. So it starts, instead of more of an interview, it's more of an accusatory. When you are, someone like Andrew or in that mindset, or, anybody that would trust the police, you try to start off being nice and you're being talkative and you're wanting to be helpful. And then it quickly turns into this place where you feel helpless and afraid. And I think if you watch The First 48, which was filmed in Memphis, the reality show, The First 48, that follows Memphis police officers, they show a lot of the interrogation techniques, and they are very loud and they are very in your face. And I am, very adamant about get the bad guys, do whatever it takes to get the bad guys, but also do it in a way that you don't feel like you're contaminating any confession or information that you're going to give them. Andrew will tell you that they showed him crime scene photos. And so when he ends up giving his second statement, it is a little more detailed, because what he would say is he'd seen the crime scene photos. So he knew, what he needed to say. And after 10, 15, 20 hours, I have woken up and had 4 hours of sleep. Both of us were talking before we got on. We've been on planes and gotten off, and the next day you feel crazy. So I can't even imagine, as somebody with, sound mind and, a higher IQ than 62, I think in the 20th hour of an interrogation, I would start losing my mind.
You would.
The top of
start questioning
your reality. You would start questioning your reality after 20 hours. And, this is at 3 a.m. in the morning. So you've been there all day, all night. And
when you're talking about someone, like you said, he has the equivalent of like a third grader. When you're dealing with children, I've worked with children for years. You have to question them very carefully, because it's so easy to plant a wrong thought in their head if you're not careful. It's very easy to manipulate a child's mind.
That's right.
And if they think that you want to hear a certain thing, and when they realize that, that's what they'll offer you, just because they think that's what you want.
That's right.
So, yeah, if they don't have some special consideration for someone in his condition, there's a lot of trouble there too.
So, his mother will tell you that she was calling up to the station that night saying, let me come up there. He's not going to understand what you're saying. And they didn't allow her to come up. So it just, from the very beginning, it seemed like he, after he waived his rights, he was in a lot of trouble. And after 27 hours, they had several leads. They had subpoenaed bank records. They had subpoenaed phone records. They had another lead on other names of other suspects. But after he confessed, poof, they didn't go after anything else. They took it to the DA and the prosecutor and said, we've got this confession. And it didn't matter that his confession matched zero evidence at the scene. His confession was he killed Danny Harris with a pipe on the back of the head in his second-story apartment 2 weeks ago. But in fact, he wasn't beaten on the back of the head. He was beaten on the front of the head. And there was no second story. I've been to Danny Harris's apartment. It's a one-story apartment. And he was killed 2 months ago, not 2 weeks. So the three pieces.
How did that hold up?
How did that hold up? How did that hold up? And
Were you able to get court transcripts for what happened in the actual trial?
Yes.
Or did it?
So I've read the trial transcripts. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury was sequestered, which is odd in a trial, but in Memphis, evidently, they do sequester a lot of murder trial, the jurors in murder trials. But it was, a classic 5-day trial. The jury came back on the 6th day. The transcripts, it was about 1,300 pages, but it was just he had a court-appointed attorney. There was a lot of mistakes that I've talked to his original attorney, and he fully admits that he made mistakes in the trial. One of the biggest mistakes he made was putting Andrew Hayes on the stand. You can imagine, and he said he didn't prep him like he wanted to. So, and I asked Andrew, did you know that you didn't have to testify? Because nowhere in the transcripts did I read that when Alex Murdaugh decided he was going to testify, what happened that day? Everything stopped. Judge Newman stopped everything. Dick Harpootlian got up and made this noisy, we've advised him not to testify. He's hurting my feelings. If you remember him saying that, he's hurting my feelings by not. But they made this big noisy pause, and Judge Newman made Alex stand up in front of him, and he said, do you understand your Fifth Amendment? You do not have to testify. And Alex said, yes, I understand. Did that happen for Andrew? No. Nowhere in the transcripts did I read anywhere where they paused, where they, the judge or anyone turned to Andrew and said, do you understand your Fifth Amendment right? Do you understand you do not have to testify? And of course, when he did testify, the prosecutor was very skilled and got Andrew to lose his cool, and he ended up testifying very poorly. And I found some jurors and interviewed some jurors, and two of the women said that they thought Andrew was not guilty until that outburst, and then they saw how he could have been. So it was a kind of a error after error that landed him with a guilty verdict, and now 18 years later, still fighting.
Wow, these false confessions, because a lot of people have no concept of how this can happen. Why would somebody do it? Why would you ever? How often does that actually happen?
It's hard to say because law enforcement doesn't recognize it as an issue. I had mentioned earlier, I've been investigating and writing this story and podcast for the last year. I took about 2 months to pause and take a deep dive into false confessions and why they happen in police interrogation tactics. And in episode 3, you'll hear from 3 experts that they're world-renowned experts on false confessions. And, the most common thing is it tends to be a younger person. It tends to be someone who has never been in trouble with the law before, someone who trusts the police, someone who is there to help, someone who waives their Miranda rights first and doesn't understand that when you waive your Miranda rights that the police are allowed to lie to you. And, you know, all of that kind of lends itself, and generally it's a lower IQ person. And almost all of the false confession stories that I've researched have one thing in common, and that is they were not recorded. And so if you don't record the interrogation, you don't see how you got there. You don't see how, if you've created, you know, any kind of contamination by showing crime scene photos. But the Innocence Project of New York has done some studies, but the data is just not there because for a very long time, police departments just don't think that it's an issue. And even as recently as a couple of days ago, I was talking to a retired police officer, and he compared the issue of false confessions like a shooting star. They just never happen. And that's just not true.
No, I looked into it because when I was looking up stuff about this case, there were so many things, and the way my mind runs down a million different roads, you know, question after question. How does this happen? How does this happen? And I wish I could remember what the number, but it was a shocking number of how often it happens. And I felt like it was more common in Memphis for some reason.
They've had some really great reporters that have reported on the false confession issue in Memphis. So it has been an issue there. It has been reported there. And it's been an issue for decades. So, and if one of the simplest things to do to try to combat it is record interrogations.
What an easy fix.
What an easy fix.
And that's the end of part 1. Part 2 coming tomorrow. Be sure and check out the podcast anywhere that you watch podcasts. Everything They Missed by Stephanie Tinsley.